So my grandparents moved from Israel to New York when my mom was 2 because they didn't want to raise a family in a war-torn country. And when they moved here, they didn't have anything. You know, the classic immigrant story. A distant relative set them up with an apartment, and my grandfather would tell me that when they moved here, the first thing that they bought wasn't an armoire, it wasn't a rug. The first piece of furniture, he would tell me, when you're starting a new home, is a table. Because you need a place for your family where you could sit around and eat and talk. This time it took me 45 minutes. It was 45 minutes, there were 3 of us, and we got all of my stuff out of my apartment in Bed-Stuy onto the truck. A 45-minute move. That's really quick. And when we were all done, my friends and I went back up to the apartment, and my friend Alex said to me, he said, "Are you sure this is it? Aren't you forgetting something?" I mean, that was way too fast. I said, no, it's, I got this. I have this down to a science. With the confidence of a professional. The truth was, I didn't have anything down to a science. The truth was, I just didn't own anything. I didn't own anything that warranted a move taking longer than 45 minutes. The truth was, I was lost and unemployed, and I had nothing going for me. The truth was, just a few weeks before that move, my brother came up to visit. And when my brother comes up to visit, I like being the cool older brother that lives in New York, and we go out and we do stuff and we eat really great food. But this time, I couldn't do any of that because I didn't have any money and I was in a pretty sad state. So one of the last nights before he left, we had some weird curry pasta dish. And I'll tell you the ingredients for this. The first step is you have to be someone's weird Craigslist roommate. Now, you'll hear a lot of stories about people that have had weird Craigslist roommates, but in this case, you had to be that person. In this case, I was that person to 2 very nice girls that lived in Bed-Stuy, because I needed to find a place last minute, and it needed to be short term. And so I was the weirdo who hung out and didn't have anything going on and was smoking pot all day in his room. And so when you're that person, you have to take on certain responsibilities, like eating their food without them knowing. And the best way to do that is to take a little bit of pasta from each of their containers, and then you take a little bit of spices from each of their containers, and you mix it around in a pot with some butter, and you dollop in some sadness, and then you stir it for a while, and you eat whatever it was that we ate. The truth was, I didn't know at all what I was doing. I was just trying to convince myself that this whole thing didn't suck. That was in early 2010. In the fall of 2008, I was moving back to New York. I had moved to New York in 2004 for school, and then over the summer after I graduated, I said I was done. So much so that I even told some of my friends, I said, "I'm done with New York." Those words came out of my mouth. And then a series of things happened. New York was inviting me back. New York said, "Asher, you got to come back. We got these jobs for you. We got this great apartment for you. You should come back." And so I put all my stuff into my friend James's car, and we drove up to New York. My first day, my first job, in my new apartment in Queens with my friend Rachel, I get up, I'm going to work my first day at this company called Technicolor. I had interned with a guy the summer before named Ed, and Ed and I got along, and he'd started this job at Technicolor, and he called me up over the summer and said, "Ash, you got to come back up. There's this great job for you up here." So I said, "Great." And on my first day there, I'm sitting waiting in the reception area, and you know how usually when you're in someplace new, it feels really big and stale because you don't know it yet and you feel scared? Well, here at Technicolor, I was home. I felt great. It was small. I made some jokes with the receptionist. Ed came out. He gave me a big hug. He was showing me around. We're talking to people. This is this editing bay. This is this editing bay over here. This is where we're going to do this cool thing. And he says, "I want to go and introduce you to one of my bosses." And we go in, and I'm talking to this guy, and we're talking about cool projects that we're going to work on, and how I'm going to edit Ugly Betty. And I know Final Cut Pro. I'll learn Avid. That's great. And then he says to me, "So when a position opens up, will you be available?" Which I thought was strange because I thought that I was working while we were having this meeting. I thought that I was on the clock, so I didn't really know what to say. So I said, I'm available right now. And then he said, "So where are you staying? Do you have some place that you can stay?" And it was at that moment when I also started to piece together in my head that there were some holes in my living situation. So that morning, I I left my new apartment, my friend Rachel's place. Rachel had moved into this apartment in Queens, and she had an extra room. And so she had talked to them. She told me over the summer when I was telling her about this job, she said, you can take the room, and she talked to the landlord, and her father talked to the landlord. And on my first day, when I'm getting ready to leave, the old Italian landlord is sitting in front, because he also lives in the building, and I go over to him to say hi and to thank him, because I'm polite, and he just immediately starts yelling at me, you can't live here. Except it's in a really angry Italian accent, which I can't do, so I'm not going to try. And he starts yelling at me, why do you have your stuff? You have to get out of here, you have to move. And I'm just brushing him off, saying, whatever. Like, clearly you're in the wrong here. We'll sort this out later. I got to go to my first day of work at Technicolor. So when I'm leaving my, interview at Technicolor, I call up one of my old managers at a bar I used to work in the East Village called Benny's Burritos. And I talked to Al over the summer also, and he said, we'd love to have you back. We'd love to give you some more shifts. So I called him, and I said, Al, you know the shifts that we talked about, they're actually much more important than I ever could have imagined. Can I still get them? And he said, sure, just talk to the new general manager. So I talked to the new general manager, who said, it's great that you know all the people here, you've worked here before, everyone on the staff likes you, but we really, really just want to hire a female bartender right now. And I'm all for women advancing in the workplace. I think it's great. It's wonderful. But at that moment, I really just wished it was the 20s again and women couldn't vote. So I'm making my way back to Queens and sitting with Rachel trying to figure out what I'm going to do. Am I going to stay? Why would I stay? I didn't really have a reason to stay. And Rachel says to me, she says, Asher, of all the people that this could be happening to, I'm really glad that it's happening to you. For a little backstory, I'm going to go back a little farther. So my grandfather, the one who moved here from Israel, his side of the family is from Israel, and they're basically desert people. They're from Iraq and Iran and places before there were countries. And he used to tell me that one of my great-great-grandfathers, somewhere back there, was a traveling salesman. So he would go around from town to town and he would sell his trinkets and wares and whatever it was that you sold back then. Now, I want you to imagine for a second that back then, there weren't hotels, there wasn't Airbnb, you couldn't stay on a buddy's couch or anything, so when you traveled somewhere new, the only way that you would have a place to stay and a warm meal was if you had a family. So eventually, it came to light that this great-great-grandfather had 8 different families spread out around 8 different towns. And when my great-great-grandmother found out about this, however she did, I don't know how gossip spread back then, but when she found out, she kicked him out, and he was never heard from again. So I just want you to realize that's my bloodline. That's where I'm coming from. I'm from wandering Jews in the desert. Rachel says, really glad this is happening to you. And what she meant, she wasn't being mean. What she meant was, really glad of all the people that you are someone who's not going to fall apart. You are someone who's going to be able to handle this, and you're not going to just cower in the corner and cry, and you'll figure this out. Now, most people, when they move to New York, they move here with a very specific purpose. People come here because they want to be the next big star or the next big finance thing, whatever it is that you do there. Like, people move here and they stay here because they have very particular reasons. I moved here initially because I got into college here. I was all set to go to Ithaca College. I got in early. I had gone up to visit. I had my T-shirt. I still have that T-shirt. And then NYU sent me a letter saying, hey, Asher, forget about Ithaca. You're actually coming up and staying in the city. And so that's what I did. I never had a purpose to stay here or to be here. And when I'm talking to Rachel, thinking through why on earth would I stay, that's when I started realizing that this was New York telling me, hey, if you really want to be here, show me why. Prove to me that you deserve to be here. And I started taking it upon myself, that move. So I would then move from there to a dining room where I slept under a table for about a year. That's true. And from there, from that move, I would move 5 times in the next 15 months, which is once every 3 months. And now, if you also looked up the definition of a nomad in the dictionary, it would be someone who moves seasonally, which is every 4 months, living up to my heritage as being a wandering Jew throughout New York. And I keep asking myself, why do I stay? Why did I stay? Why would someone stay when everything the city within its power was doing was trying to push me away? Why would I stay if I did eventually find an apartment and then felt settled, and then the landlords called and said, we're actually selling the building so you have to move? Why would I stay through that? Why then, when I find an apartment, 2 weeks before I'm supposed to move in, the landlords call and say, actually the current tenants are refusing to leave, so you can't move in? Why, if you finally find a piece of furniture that you want to claim as your own, something that you want to make yours, something that the next time you move it's going to take longer than 45 minutes to get all of your stuff into a van, and that piece of furniture is going to turn out to be a desk. It's going to be a beautiful oak desk that once lived in the Brooklyn DA's office, and you're going to go out to some guy's house in Ocean Parkway, and you're going to carry it out somehow through his house without destroying the house or desk, get it into the van, get it to your new apartment, to find out that it doesn't fit through the door. Why would I stay through all of this? Just to live this dream of living in New York, which I didn't have to begin with. To start answering some of these, I started backing up and thought about what I was doing right before I left and moved up to New York the first time. So I was in high school theater, which if you were in high school drama, you know that it's not really an after-school club. It's a family. And the people who I met and became friends with in theater and did shows with are still people who are near and dear to my heart to this day. Now, our senior show was a show called All in the Timing, which is a series of short plays. And the Saturday night of the weekend of our show, so the next day being the last show, Saturday night we do our show, we all go out, and we're getting some pizza, and I'm leaving to make a quick run to Taco Bell because that's what you did in high school. And as I'm getting to my car, my friend Shelly comes running up to me, and she's in tears. She says, Asher, can you drive me somewhere? No hesitation, of course. Whatever you need. We get in my car, start driving away, driving in the parking lot, and I say, where are we going? She said, can you just drive down Lake Hill Road. I think Kat tried to kill herself. Kat was a friend of all of ours. She was part of the theater family, and Kat and I had a falling out, just a stupid high school thing a few months earlier, and I hadn't seen her in about 4 months. And I didn't know how to deal with emotions or fighting or anything when I was 17, so my way of dealing with our fight was just ignoring her and pushing her away. So I hadn't seen her, I didn't know what was going on in her life. I had heard from other people that she had started going down sort of a dark path. She was hanging out with the bad kids, which were the theater kids, but that's neither here nor there. And she'd started drinking, and she'd started doing drugs, stopped taking medications. We're driving down Lay Hill Road, and I very, very distinctly remember a disconnect between my body and my mind saying, Asher, you should probably slow down. This minivan isn't equipped to go this fast, and my body ignoring it completely and driving as fast as I possibly could. We get down Lay Hill Road, and there's a car off on the side, there's an ambulance, there's a single policeman who's taking off the area. We get out of the car, Shelley collapses nearly immediately. The cop comes over to me and he says, excuse me, you have to leave, there's been an accident. I said, no, we know what happened. He said, no, there was a traffic accident. I said, I know, we know that was our friend. We know she jumped in front of the car. I said, how can you possibly know that? Well, she wrote about it in her Zenga. What's a Zenga? Well, it's like this online blog thing. It's like a journal. I can show it to you. Throughout the rest of the night, I would then describe Zenga to about 4 or 5 different tiers of police force. We stuck around for a little while. Kat at that point had been taken to a hospital. We're answering questions, we're talking to people, a crowd is growing. I remember very, very distinctly the woman who was driving the car was still there. She was being treated by paramedics. And I wanted so badly to go over there and talk to her and just tell her that this wasn't her fault. She just got in the way. we never had the chance to go over and talk to her. The next morning, the morning of our final show, before anything, I went over to Shelley's, and where my friends Dan and Katie were also staying. And they were getting ready to go to the hospital to go visit Kat. And so I immediately said, sure, of course, that's what we're doing. The show doesn't matter. We just need to go be there for Kat. And Katie, who was in the show, Katie turns to me and she says, Asher, you have to go back to the high school and make sure that we do the show. Dan and Shelley are screaming, it doesn't matter. Why would he do that? He has to come with us. We have to go see Kat. The show doesn't matter. And through all of this, through everything that was going on, Katie looks directly at me and she says, Asher, the show must go on. They went to the hospital. I went to the high school. No one knew what we were doing. No one knew what to do when I got there. People were wandering around aimlessly. Some people were crying. A few of us got together and we talked to the theater directors. Should we do the show? Is it appropriate to do the show? Does it even matter? We eventually decided we'll do the show. Now, Katie was in the show, and so On the Timing is a series of plays, and Katie was in a couple of them. And so we just said, well, we just won't do those, which was easy enough. You could just lift them out. Now, one of them was a play called Words, 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 which is about 3 monkeys typing on typewriters. Another guy who was in that one, Greg, said, well, if we're not doing that one, I don't want to do any of mine. And Greg was in a bunch of them. So if we didn't do all of his, then all of a sudden it was a different thing. Maybe we couldn't even do the show. So I said, I'll do it. I'll do her role. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'll read the role. I'll walk on stage with a script, and I'll read the role. We'll do the scene. They said, Asher, you can't play the role of a female monkey. I said, look, her dress is backstage. I'll go try it on, and if it fits, then we'll do it. So I'm walking backstage to the dressing room, and this is a hallway that I'm walking down that I've been down thousands of times. This is more home to me than hallways in any home that I've ever lived in. If it was the middle of the night, I could get up and not turn the lights on and walk down this hallway without bumping into anything. But now when I'm walking down, it's giant, and it's vast, and it's sterile, because I don't want to be there. I want to be at the hospital with Dan and Katie. I want to be there for Kat. I put on the dress. It sort of fit. Katie is a much smaller person than I am. It wasn't particularly flattering to me, my body, or my chest hair at all, but I put on the dress, and as soon as Greg saw me, he said, look, if you're going to wear that stupid thing, then let's just do it. We'll do the whole thing. So we walked around, started getting people ready to do the show. We did the show. And for a couple hours, we got to be kids again. I went on stage with a script. We threw bananas at each other. It was a senior show. Afterwards, we're cleaning up and sweeping, and someone comes over to us and says, guys, we should probably get going. We might hear from Dan and Katie soon. The bubble popped, and we were back in the real world. A few days later, Kat eventually passed away. And after all the questions that don't have answers, all the hows and whys, all the questions of which the answers don't matter at all, the why didn't I, why didn't you, how could anyone, you get to a point where you just realize that sometimes people just need someone there for them. Sometimes someone just needs another person there, and Kat didn't have that. She didn't have anyone to sit around a table with. Katie was right to send me back to the high school. Katie knew that she could send me back there, and I would take the responsibility of myself to make sure that we did that show. 3 months later, I moved up to New York. And I've had lots of weird responsibilities that I've shouldered. I think it's kind of a strange word. A lot of weird roles that have never been clear to me, but have been clear to other people. In the summer of 2009, I started working on a political campaign. Now, it's worth noting that I have zero background or experience in politics. The only thing that I could bring to the table was having seen all of the West Wing. So we lost that campaign pretty soundly. I don't think it was just because of me. I mean, I do think the fact that the person who was second in command of the campaign, having zero credentials, had something to do with it, but I don't think it was my fault. That campaign, however, got me introduced to some people, which got me onto another campaign, which was John Liu for city controller, which won. So you're welcome. I then didn't hear anything from the campaign for a few months until New Year's Eve 2009. So December 31st, they asked me to come into the transition office to help prepare for Inauguration Day, which was the next day, New Year's Day. So I go over, I say, sure, I'm answering some phone calls, I'm opening tickets and sorting things, and around 5 o'clock, a woman who I knew from the campaign, she comes over to me, she has a red folder in her hand, and she says, Asher, so as you know, so-and-so really loved the work that you did on the campaign, and we'd like to offer you a job. And she hands me the folder that has a piece of paper, and it's got a bunch of words, and there's a salary amount on there, and she says, do you want the job? And I didn't know how jobs worked. I didn't know that someone just handed you a piece of paper, and then you said yes, and then you were employed. I had no idea how any of that stuff worked. So I just said, sure, and then I took the folder, and then I had a job, I thought, I guess. And she said, great, so you can help work Inauguration Day tomorrow morning. So I said, sure. I went home, I called my parents and said, I think I have a job. They said, doing what? I said, I don't know. They said, for who? I said, for this guy John that I worked for a few months on the campaign. They said, why? I said, I still don't know. But I have to work in a few hours. So I, the next morning, woke up, New Year's Day, still really hungover. I mean, I was the first person there, so I was responsible, but I was still really hungover. It's that there's a balance there. And so I wasn't at the actual inauguration. I was helping set up for the after party. And I get there, and there's a security guard there, and she's asking me who I am, why I'm there, what I'm doing. I said, I'm Asher, I'm here for the thing, I'm not really sure. And she says, great, and she starts showing me around, and we're making small talk. She says, how long have you been working for John? I said, about 10 hours or so. And we both had a good laugh about it. And then I was employed. That's when I felt like I had a job. Now, I was hired as a public affairs associate. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's because it doesn't really mean anything. So the office of the city controller is a financial office, right? They deal with accounting, they deal with the pension, they deal with audits. Again, zero background in any of that stuff. So I was hired as what's known as a political hire. That means that someone calls up someone else and says, you got to hire this guy Asher. And then the other person says, why? Does he have any tangible skills that are pertinent to the office of the controller? And they say, no, it doesn't matter, you just have to hire him for something. And it's also worth noting that if you look at the city charter of the city controller, it spells out very explicitly all the different roles and jobs of the entire office, this many auditors, this many accountants, this many people doing this and that. And then at the very back it says, and I guess you can also have a Department of Public Affairs, do it doesn't matter. So that's where I worked. Public Affairs Associate came with a lot of weird responsibilities. Basically, we would go out into the community. We were sort of the public face of the office. So I was a professional who went out and got yelled at for a living. That's basically what I did. You'd go to different communities, talk to people, go to meetings, set up things, hear about issues. But I would do all sorts of really weird things that I never would have imagined that I would end up in. One time, I was at a wedding anniversary for two old Chinese people. It was the 60th wedding anniversary. Now, John Liu is a very prominent Asian American, and so he was beloved by the Asian American community. This couple was celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary, which is, that's a big deal. That's pretty cool. So they invited John, and we wrote out a big commendation that we had framed. But John, was a busy person, so he couldn't make it, so he sent me, for some reason, to go be his representative. So I went and spoke in front of 300 Chinese people to celebrate a wedding anniversary, and in broken Cantonese sort of, I guess, made my way through. I also, one time, had to speak in front of a group of Polish people to talk about the importance of community because they were commemorating the closing of a Polish concentration camp, which I didn't really know much about until they asked me to come up and start speaking without prepared remarks, while I was also on a dais with Auschwitz survivors. So that was also part of the roles and responsibilities. One other thing that we'd have to do is staff John at different events, which meant getting there a little early and just sort of showing up and getting the lay of the land beforehand. Once I was staffing him at this really big Japanese event, and I don't remember the name of the organization. I just know that it was at the Midtown Marriott Marquis, which is an enormous venue, and there were thousands of Japanese people. There were dignitaries, there were ambassadors, and then there was me sort of wandering around trying to find a seat for him at this table. And at one point, Mayor Bloomberg came in, and he went and he sat down. Next to him was an empty seat. So I said, oh, that's perfect. That's the seat that I need to go save for John. Let me go over and talk to the mayor's staffer and just set that up. So I walk around. I introduce myself to the first security guard. I show my ID. I walk through, trying to get the attention of the staffer. And then another security guard comes over to me. And I'm explaining again, I'm Asher. I work in the city controller's office. I just wanted to go, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, you see I'm talking with my hands. Now, I realized at a certain point during this exchange with the enormous security guard that my hand here was about an inch or so away from Mayor Bloomberg's head, who was staring that way. So he had no idea what was going on, but the security guard became incredibly aware very, very quickly at how close my hand was to hitting the mayor in the back of the head. When he became incredibly aware, I became incredibly aware that he was incredibly aware. And so I just said, never mind, and then I walked away. And that was also something that I had to do. Now, being a public affairs associate is kind of strange, but I was really good at it. I was so good at it, in 3.5 years, I was promoted twice, which is absurd for a department that doesn't even exist in the charter. And so, as you would do with anything that you're doing really well at and being told you're doing really well at, I quit. I quit the job. And on my last day, it was a beautiful Hollywood little ending. I was the last person to leave. It was snowing outside. I closed down, I turned off all the lights on an empty office. I locked the door, and I left. This is important to me because I left. I chose that I was going to leave. I didn't want to be handed anything anymore. I didn't want to be handed a job on a piece of paper that I didn't deserve or that I didn't merit. I didn't want all of these frivolities and all of these really strange experiences that I didn't deserve. I wanted to earn staying and living in New York. I knew that when I left, that I would never have the same sense of validation of talking to a security guard and being able to make a joke that I just started working 10 hours before, and I didn't really know why, and that I'd be able to tell my parents, I have a job, but I don't know what it is. Isn't that great? I knew that I wasn't going to have that anymore. I knew that I was going to wander, and I knew that that's what I wanted. The beginning of 2009, I started working as a night manager at a bar called the Sidewalk Cafe in the East Village. Now, at the time, I was still living in the dining room. I was pretty much getting high every day. I had no direction. I had no hope. I had nothing going on for me. The Sidewalk Cafe called me up. There was an open call for a position. I guess I had dropped off my resume on one of my walks around, dropping resumes off at bars. And I went in, and I interviewed with the owner and the general manager, and I nailed the interview. I absolutely killed it on that interview. Now, it's possible that the fact that the owner was Israeli, and I may have played my mom is from Israel. Oh, I know that bar in Tel Aviv, of course. Maybe our interview had more to do with Israel than the actual job, but they hired me on site, which I would find out later they had never done before. They hired me on the spot. They said, Asher, you're great. Israel's awesome. We want to give you the night manager position. Now, if the term night manager position doesn't mean anything to you, that's because it's a made-up position, and also it doesn't have any real roles and responsibilities attached to it. It was a very weird position. So the night manager, on the one hand, we were in charge of locking up the entire restaurant at the end of the night. We were in charge of counting the money and making sure that that was secure. On the other hand, we were also in charge of sweeping the restaurant at the end of the night and taking the trash out. So it was always a little vague to me what we were supposed to do. My first day there, my very first day, before I'm even trained, before the guy who is going to train me even shows up, a homeless guy walks in, he starts making a ruckus, he starts flailing around. The owner, the large Israeli man, he comes out, he pushes the guy outside. We're kind of watching this, and one of the waitresses turns to me and she says, "Asher, you have to go outside and help him. That's part of your job." I didn't know any better, so I went outside. Peony is pushing the guy, the homeless guy's pushing back. I'm now getting in the middle of it, pushing them back. Peony turns to me and says, "Go inside and call the cops." So I walk back inside, I call 911, "What's your emergency?" "Well, there's a homeless guy and he's disturbing the restaurant." "Okay, where are you located?" "Well, we're at the corner of 6th and A." "All right, but what's the address?" "I don't know the address." "All right, fine, we'll send a car around. What's the phone number in case we need to call you back for anything?" "I don't know the phone number." "Sir, how do you not know the address or phone number of the place that you work?" I said, I started working here literally 4 minutes ago. I have no, she said, "Fine, I don't care." She hung up. Cops came, took the guy, it was fine. The main job of the night manager was to deal with homeless people. Sidewalk Cafe is the corner of 6th and A. Tompkins Square Park is 2 blocks away. If you don't know Tompkins Square Park, it's basically just a hotbed for heroin addicts, homeless people. And they would come by. And the policy of Sidewalk Cafe is to shoo them away. "No, you can't come in here." Complete instant denial. I always had a problem with that, because if it's slow and a homeless person comes in, they ask nicely for something, yeah, you can have a glass of water. Yeah, you can sit down for a few minutes. It's not a big deal. But if they ever start disturbing the customers, yeah, you got to shoo them away. And so that's the tension that I lived with every day working there. We had a big outdoor area also, and on the weekends we would have brunch. And that's really when our job sort of kicked into gear, because homeless people would come and walk up and down the sidewalk and start talking to people and asking for money. And from my perspective, until it looks like they're causing some sort of scene, then why would I tell someone who's just having a conversation with some people that they had to leave? That never felt right to me. So one Sunday, it's particularly busy. I've already had to shoo away a bunch of homeless people. Standing outside, and there's a man walking down the sidewalk towards the restaurant. And I can tell even from a distance, he's sort of a little shaky. He's carrying around a big bushel of red flowers. And he walks closer, and I can see that the people that he's talking to are really sort of disturbed and don't like what's going on. So I walk over to him and I say, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, but you can't bother the customers. I need you to leave." He turns to me and he says, "Am I pretty?" Which is a weird thing to have told to you by a homeless person. I mean, to that point, I'd heard all sorts of strange things from different homeless people. I mean, there was Hot Dog, who's a woman who would come into the bar, and you would just give her a bunch of bar napkins, and then she would yell, and then she would leave, and that's what made Hot Dog happy. There was a guy who would come in fairly regularly and ask if he could sleep in the bathroom for 10 minutes, and if it was slow, I would let him, and I'd say, "After 10 minutes, I'm coming in and escorting you out." There was one guy who came in once, and he shot up heroin in front of me, and then offered me some, which was cordial, but unnecessary. I never heard, "Am I pretty?" And I could see in his eyes, I could see in his face that he wasn't completely there. There's definitely something wrong with him mentally. And I could start seeing every single person that had ever walked past him and ignored him and just not seen him as a person. "Am I pretty?" And I told him something that I wish someone had told me when I first moved here, something that I wish we would tell anyone who ever gets kicked out of an apartment or has to move 5 times in 15 months, something that I wish I could have told Kat or the woman in the car, something that I wish that we would just tell each other more often when we're just trying to live and survive in this city, which is just trying to kick us out the entire time. Put his hand on my shoulder. Am I pretty? Put my hand on his shoulder. Yeah, you're beautiful. And he smiled, I think, recognizing that I was talking to him. He nodded, and he walked away. In that moment, I wasn't a night manager, I wasn't a public affairs associate, I wasn't an editor. We were just 2 people talking to each other on the sidewalk. We didn't have the blinders that we always put up. We didn't have all the labels and faces that the city wants us to put on. We could just be there in that moment. I have no idea if I had any kind of impact on that man. And honestly, it doesn't matter because he has had an enormous impact on me, because that was the moment when I started realizing that it doesn't matter if I'm okay. That this city can do whatever it wants to me, and I am going to be okay knowing that it's not going to be okay. I'm going to be okay wandering around. Why do I stay in New York? Why do I stay through all this? I stay for Rachel, and I stay for Kat. I stay for the security guard and for the man with the red flowers. I stay here because you're here and because I'm here. And we have these tables that we can sit around and eat and talk. Thank you.